Afternoon and welcome to the Full Scottish on Sunday the 21st of April. My name is Brian Liddy and I'm joined today by Linda Fabiani. Linda, welcome. Thank you for joining us again. And Linda, you were an MSP and in Holyrood and now retired since 2021, but thank you for joining us again. And Hugh Marshall. Hugh, welcome. And Hugh, you're the founder of the national newspaper in Wales and Talk in Wales. And so again, thank you both of you for giving up part of your weekend to join us. So start off today's show with the Ukraine update. Today is day 788. The US House of Representatives has finally approved more than $61 billion worth of military assistance to help Ukraine fight back against Russia. In a bipartisan vote, 210 Democrats and 101 Republicans joined together to support Ukraine with 112 Republicans. A majority of them, with 112 Republicans, a majority of them voting against. Forgive me there. The Senate is set to begin considering the bill on Tuesday, with some preliminary votes that afternoon. Final passage is expected next week, which would clear the way for Joe Biden, the US president, to sign it into law. The Pentagon can get weapons moving to Ukraine quickly once the bill passes the Senate and gets Biden's signature. Storage sites in Europe and the US already hold some of the munitions and air defence components the Ukrainians desperately need. A US military official told Associated Press that the US would be able to send certain munitions almost immediately to Ukraine from European storehouses, including 155mm rounds and other artillery, along with some air defence munitions. Immediately after the bill passed, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked both the Democrats and Republicans, and personally Speaker Mike Johnson for the decision that keeps history on the right track. Democracy and freedom will always have global significance, he said, and will never fail as long as America helps to protect it. The vital US aid bill passed today by the House will keep the war from expanding, save thousands and thousands of lives, and help both of our nations become stronger. Thank you, America. In Russia, the Kremlin threatened retaliation over measures in the aid bill to confiscate seized Russian assets and transfer them to Ukraine to fund reconstruction. Russia started the conflict when it illegally annexed Crimea in 2014 and then launched an unprovoked and illegal invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Ukraine says it is an independent and sovereign country and is acting in self-defense. Ukraine attacked 8 Russian regions with dozens of long-range strike drones, setting ablaze a fuel depot and hitting 3 power substations on Saturday, an intelligence source in Kyiv told Reuters. The source said the facilities were targeted for supporting Russian military-industrial production. A fuel energy facility in Russia's western Smolensk region's Khardim district was hit with a reservoir of fuel and oil set on fire. A Russian attack killed a man in Ukraine's central Dnipropetrovsk region, while artillery strikes on residential buildings in the northeastern city of Vovchansk left 2 others dead. The US is prepared to act against Chinese companies supporting Russia's war in Ukraine, a senior US official has said, as Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, prepares to visit China this week. US officials have given stark warnings about what they say is China's assistance in retooling and resupplying Russia's defence industry. So, Linda, we're going to devote a bit more time to the Ukraine than we usually do at the weekend. But I'll ask my traditional routine question. Was there anything in today's update that caught your eye?
Well, not particularly, apart from relief that, as we heard yesterday, the US had finally released these funds. So I'm pleased about that. There's nothing else about it that's particularly surprising. Russia's response, Putin always responds in the same way. So let's see where we're at. I mean, my concern is that all we're ever managing to do here is just achieve a sort of stalemate between Ukraine and Russia. We don't seem to be moving forward. And I wouldn't pretend to have the answers for that, because There are all sorts of international issues, diplomacy issues, all sorts going on when you're talking about one state having, invaded another, and where the retaliation comes in. There's all the issues about NATO round about it. But I am concerned that this could just go on for years and years and years. When it looks like Ukraine's going to be completely overrun by Russia, something else comes up to stop it happen. And it's a ridiculous amount of time that money was held up by the US, by the actions of particular politicians, some of whom I've listened to a wee bit since the decision. And I don't have the words to describe how batty some of these people seem to be, um, completely ignorant of what's going on in the world out with the US, and nasty.
Thank you, Linda. Hugh, the same question to you. Is there anything that you'd like to draw attention to from today? Oh, we've lost you. We've lost your hound.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Sorry, I've
Yes.
the microphone. Yeah, just echoing what Linda was saying. It seems it's a shame that it's taken 6 months for this to come through, and it's been blocked because of the Trumpites, and it is a cult. They're just detached from the real world, and I think the fact that Putin has played them basically like fiddles for the past how many years is just shocking. But I think it's it's good news. It has had an impact, because we know from recent news reports that sort of Russian rockets have been coming through. I think for every 4 artillery shell that is fired at Ukraine from Russia, they can only fire 1 back. So I think hopefully this will make a change. But as Linda's saying, it's basically just prolonging a stalemate. And I think what they're trying to do is get in a position where Ukraine, potentially sort of negotiates a peace, which hopefully I don't, personally, hopefully I don't want them to be forced into that situation, because Putin needs to be defeated, because if he wins in Ukraine, God knows where he's going to go next.
Thank you, Hugh. So you both used the word stalemate in your responses there, and I think you're referring to this seems to be some kind of stasis. So how do you think we unlock it, Linda? I mean, is it really just going to be about this $61 billion in the supply of munitions?
No, that I don't believe that's going to. It might give us a wee bit more action, but my own view is that we'll probably reach a stalemate yet again. And as Hugh was saying, the diplomatic efforts go on. The discussion has to go on. At some point, a peace may well be negotiated. My concern about that is that if Putin is able to turn that into a win, if Ukraine has to concede some land, for example, and Putin turns that into a win, great victory, as Hugh says, where does he go next? Because the man is completely power hungry. He's obsessional about Mother Russia. And, when you read the history of some of the leaders in Russia, under all regimes, it just seems to be happening again. So that is my big concern, that Ukraine is going to end up very compromised.
Thank you, Linda. So Linda, you're saying it's not enough just to throw money at the situation or munitions. That there needs to be some kind of meaningful talk. So Hugh, do you agree with that? And if I would imagine you would, how could we get them to sit round the table and discuss it in a meaningful way?
Well, it has to be in a position where Ukraine are in power. I think one thing we realise, this has been going on for 2 years now. One thing that is taking time is training Ukrainian forces in the use of Western weaponry, aircraft, because one of the things is obviously that the Russians have air superiority. So I think there will potentially, with this money coming through as well, there will be a shift as the Ukrainians become better equipped, better trained, and hopefully that will force a hand. But countries like China have a big hand in this, because obviously where are Russia getting their kit and equipment from? We know they're getting some from Iran, which again, ties into what's happening in the Middle East at the moment. It's a really complicated situation, but we just cannot let Putin win.
Thank you, Hugh. I've got the Gaza figures coming up next, but just before we move on to that, then, just from what you were saying there, Hugh, I seem to remember reporting here in Broadcasting Scotland about what certain EU countries were doing. Was it Belgium was going to? Was it in the Netherlands? Were they going to give over, or Germany was going to hand over its munitions because they weren't planning to use them themselves? And there seemed to be lots of. Was it Denmark? Forgive me, I've got a really bad recall on this, but do you think Belgium was going to give money from their bank accounts and stuff like that? But do you think the fact that we don't hear about it so much in the mainstream media, and that most of the mainstream media seems to be more concerned with Gaza and Israel, is that one of the reasons why we've got this stalemate?
I think it is a problem, because obviously there's just so much news happening at the moment. I think case in point is what's been happening between Israel and Iran. That's taken people's eyes off Gaza. Gaza's taken people's eyes off Ukraine, because there is only so much news people can take in. But I think it is important that this information is out there and shared with people. But I think that's an issue for people like ourselves who are developing news platforms, to find ways of making sure that important information gets out to people.
Thank you, Hugh. And Linda, I mean, I'm struggling to put that list of EU countries together, but I think the idea was that when they did that they try to find a different way of handling this, and the idea was supposed to be that more countries would sign up, and we haven't really heard anything of that. And this thing about Gaza sort of stealing the limelight when it comes to the news, is that one of the reasons why we're stuck in this?
Well, I suppose there are myriad reasons for where we are. I mean, certainly, from what we see, from what we get reported and what we see, there doesn't seem to be a huge unity amongst other countries in Europe about the way forward. I mean, I know that you mentioned some countries, and then Czech Republic has been doing a lot, others have been doing a lot. I can sit here completely as an observer and say it doesn't look like there is a great degree of cooperation and things coming on. But, I don't know what's going on in the background. The EU is a major player itself, and then all the different nation states are players in this too. And we don't get reported in any great detail about what is happening. And there's times we shouldn't, because, one of the things about proper international diplomacy is trust amongst partners. And there has to be a degree of, I hesitate to say secrecy, but you can't have full transparency, and plans all laid out the minute they're made. So I hesitate to hugely criticise the major players in this, because we really don't know what's going on in the background. I do have a concern about not getting any news really much about Ukraine at all these days, but there is so much else happening. Reporters are limited to how much they can get round. Newspapers are limited to how much they can actually produce. And we all know that mainstream news programmes, they do bite-sized chunks. It's very seldom you get proper discussion. So I can understand why we're not getting as much information as we would like, but it is frustrating.
Thank you, Linda. So the figures for Gaza from yesterday are that there's at least been 34,097 Palestinian people have been killed, and 76,980 have been injured in Israeli strikes on Gaza since the 7th of October. The Gaza Health Ministry said in a statement today. An estimated 48 Palestinians were killed and 79 others were injured in the past 24 hours. The ministry added most of the casualties have been women and children, the ministry said, and thousands more bodies are likely to remain uncounted under the rubble. So while the news headlines on the Middle East have focused on Israel and Iran, the killing in Gaza continues since the 7th of October. The commitment to a two-state solution for Palestine and Israel seems further away than ever after the US vetoed Palestine becoming a full UN member in a UN Security Council vote. The UK abstained. Hugh, have you been keeping up with developments in Gaza? Have you anything that you'd like to say?
Yeah, it's just deeply disappointing, as I say, with that vote to recognise Palestine, because there can, it can only be solved by having a two-state solution, and those two states, you need to have Hamas removed from the Palestinian side, and Netanyahu and his right-wing cabal removed from the other side, and try and find some moderates who can come up with a plan where people can live side by side. It's clear from what we've seen, not just from what's been happening in Gaza, but what's been going on in the West Bank and what's been going on for years with Israeli settlers. That there is, you get the feeling that Palestinians are seen as other, as second class, and that they don't, deserve a place in what is now, the state of Israel, and that needs to change. And I think it was interesting with the diplomacy going on about with Iran. We had David Cameron being ignored by people all around the world, and that's shown how sort of the Conservatives and the British government have fallen down the pecking order in recent times. Saying that they're going to have a word with Israel and tell them that they need to do this and that. Netanyahu saying, I'm not listening to anybody, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. Well, maybe if the Western countries like the United States and the UK stood up to Israel and said, well, no, we are going to recognise Palestine, we're not going to supply you with arms, maybe then they will start listening.
Thank you, Hugh. And Linda, I was just thinking, Hugh mentioned there, and we talked about in the report, that the UN Security Council vote that the UK abstained on. That differs from the Scottish Government's stand on Palestine, I believe, isn't it?
I haven't seen anything directly about that vote, I have to say, Brian, but the divergence in view between the Scottish government over this conflict is huge, generally. I mean, our government in Scotland here absolutely supports stopping arms to Israel, for example. I'm really interested in some of the stuff that Hugh was saying, and there was a particular phrase when you said that it seems that Palestinians are thought of as second class people. I'd go even further. I don't think there's any seams about it. To me, it's very, very plain. When you look at Netanyahu's government, some of the rhetoric that has been used by his ministers, etc., about the Palestinian people is absolutely disgusting. Shocking, shocking stuff that I wouldn't repeat. So certainly over in Palestine, the Palestinians have no recognition at all. And they certainly seem like second-class world citizens in the eyes of those in power in the rest of the world, which is hugely sad. The UN issue, I thought, was interesting. It took many, many years for Palestine to even get observer status at the UN. And, folks were pleased when that happened at the time because it felt like a step forward. And then, of course, everything's gone to pot since then. It would have been a great message to send out to Israel, along with stopping arms sales. The two big things that could be done: recognise Palestine as a state, and stop arms sales to Israel. These are the two big messages that should be sent out. And following on from that, as Hugh said, yes, stymie Hamas and get rid of Netanyahu and his mob, because they're thugs in suits. It would be the only way forward. The US, UK, somebody else abstained, I think, can't remember who. Sorry, who was it, Brian? Right. Switzerland, thank you very much. So the others were for it. Let's look in that a wee bit in the positive side and keep pushing the rest to really send out that message and force the issue, because we've had all this diplomacy for all these years, so-called diplomacy, under cover of which Israel is still land grabbing in the West Bank. It's not working.
Thanks, Linda. I'm technically we're out of time on this, but I stole a wee bit of time from the Ukraine update, so I'm going to try and make up for it here. I'm just interested that the figures that we cite for the death toll in Gaza comes from the Gaza Health Ministry, which, tell me if I'm wrong, I believe is got associated with Hamas. Linda, you mentioned Hamas there as well. So a lot of people say, or Israel says, that those figures therefore cannot be trusted, and yet they refuse to. And yet they refuse to let in any independent journalists who would be able to verify figures, I would like to think. So what do you think? What does that tell you? And Hugh, I think it was your turn.
Yeah, like I say, the UN say that those figures are, because some people think they're an underestimation. But whether they're it's 35,000, 25,000, or 40,000, it's tens of thousands too many, and the majority of these are women and children. Sort of Israel, yes, they have a right to self-defense, but does self-defense then mean that you just slaughtering innocent people? I think what was interesting was when they were saying now with the Israel saying that in their last phase, because Hamas I think are down to their last 4 battalions. So from that perspective, you would think that how long is this going to carry on? But basically, with every day that passes, more and more of Gaza is being wiped off the face of the earth. The reconstruction of Gaza is going to take millions, billions of pounds, and it's going to take years. And unfortunately, we'll see that Israel won't be cooperative to allowing, sort of foreign nations to support that work, because they'll claim that it's just, helping Hamas rebuild themselves. So, whatever happens, it's a scene of devastation. And there are children who are orphaned. It's just incredibly sad, and I just wish that the West, as we're supposed to be, superior when it comes to politics and the way we conduct ourselves, would actually do something.
Thank you, Hugh. We're really up against it for time now, but Linda, am I right in thinking that a lot of these figures, they're usually named? These are often people that I think have been identified, that have lost their lives. Have you got anything to add, just briefly?
Well, I mean, the NGOs, the aid agencies and stuff that are able to be there, and indeed the UN, are verifying these figures. There's no reason to doubt them. And the absolute devastation that's going on, there's no reason to doubt these figures at all. And also the indiscriminate way in which Israel appears to act. The civilian deaths, it doesn't seem to matter that there's all these children. So I wouldn't trust anything Israel says at the moment. The Israeli government is just beyond the pale for me. The way they're behaving, the things they have said in the past. Why would you have confidence in anything they're saying now?
Thank you, Linda. So we found out this week that the UK is to delay yet again the start of the health and safety checks on EU imports. Brexit plans are in disarray as EU import checks have been delayed, say businesses. Border checks were due to come into force on the 30th of April next week, and they've been delayed. How many times is that now? Several, I think. Under the rules, medium and high risk products, 6 times I'm told. So under the rules, medium and high risk products, which include meat and dairy products as well as most plants, could be subject to checks at the border as part of a move to enhance the UK's biosecurity. These higher risk products are going to focus. Checks on higher risk products are going to be scaled up they say in a sensible and controlled way, and yet there's no timeline when all this is going to be put in place. It looks also like there's going to be price increases in supermarkets and food shortages. So, Hugh, I think I'm right in saying that your family have a farming background. So, are these checks not being put in place affecting you personally?
Yeah, well, like I said, my wife's family farming family originally, and we live on part of the old family farm, and we're surrounded by farms. So we talk to farmers on a regular basis and see that the impact that Brexit is having. We have a second sort of situation from Brexit, which is impacting us in Wales. Is obviously the farm payments. So there's Welsh government are trying to bring it. They're in consultation at the moment about paying farmers to plant more trees. And cut down on the number of livestock, and that's caused a lot of issues and protestations. But I think one of the other impacts we see in Wales is obviously Wales was one of the main corridors through that food came from Ireland to and from the continent through the ports of Fishguard and Holyhead. Well, since Brexit, they've just bypassed Wales, and those ships are now sailing directly from Ireland to mainland Europe. And one of the other issues is, we're talking about these checks, is the capacity that our sort of border forces have to do this work, because it's no surprise that under the Conservatives that all these departments are underfunded, they're understaffed, they're incapable of doing stuff. And obviously the knock-on effect is talking to businesses, especially ones who operate in food in Wales, is just the paperwork has sort of exploded. So it's just that it's a nightmare scenario. It was all foretold. We were all told that we were sort of Project Doom, but everything we said that was going to happen has happened. And I think you can see from the opinion polls, people are realising now that they were sold a pup.
Thank you, Hugh. And Linda, reading articles about this item, they rarely seem to mention the fact that these are controls that are not being put in place at Britain's border, so we're not protecting our borders. The UK is not protecting its borders. The EU have put these controls in place on their side, so it's completely imbalanced. What do you think if you were a business a UK business trying to export to an EU country? How would you feel?
Oh, absolutely gutted. It must be such. I mean, we've heard from Hugh, from the producers and farmers side, but there's also all these others associated businesses with exports that are finding things really, really tough. And we actually don't hear an awful lot about it. And this, as you said, is the 6th time that there's been a delay on this side. It's entirely down to the UK government. The EU seem to have got their act together from their perspective. So it's down to the UK government. Scotland and indeed Wales are helpless in the face of that. And I understand that the admin infrastructure isn't anywhere near ready, so it could be this will be delayed yet again. But there's another element, Brian. Whenever I distrust this UK government so deeply that you always have to look at what else is happening round about the announcement they make. And so they make this announcement about this delay again. And then you look further, and not only have the EU got their act together in that. But you learn that the European Commission have been making an offer to the UK to discuss things like freedom of movement for young people. I think it was for 18 to 30-year-olds or something. In terms of study, in terms of life experience, all these things that went on for decades. And the UK government have refused to even discuss it. So there they are, hammering our citizens yet again. Scottish youngsters who would relish the chance to be able to go and do part of their studies, be able to go and work in a European mainland country for a while, just completely denied. And I have to say, I'm even more shocked to have read that the Labour Party have said they agree. I can't see any differences between UK Conservative and UK Labour when it comes to these big issues. Europe, just sums it up. So I'm absolutely appalled about the future of the UK, regardless of who comes into power down there. I suspect it will be Labour, and that would seem to be what's happening. Whether we'll see a huge difference, I'm not at all sure. It just makes my absolute belief in independence for Scotland just so much deeper.
Thank you, Linda. And Linda, I'm guessing that's not your rooster that we can hear in the background. I'm guessing that must be Hugh's.
No.
But yeah, so you're referring to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. He rejected an offer of youth mobility scheme between the EU and the UK. Hugh, and as Linda said, Sir Keir Starmer has also rejected the very same offer. The thing that staggered me, I don't know if you realised this, but Keir Starmer knocked back the offer, the EU's offer, on Thursday, and Rishi Sunak knocked it back on the next day, on the Friday. So what does this tell you about any incoming Labour administration?
It just makes you feel depressed, doesn't it? Because as Linda was saying, they're both the same sides of one sheet of paper. And it was interesting. We had Rachel Reeves on Twitter saying that where the Conservatives are going to get the 46 billion for the unfunded cutting of national insurance, but we're not hearing anything about how are they going to fund the health service, how are they going to fund education, and those are devolved matters, and are impacted more in Wales, and I'm sure they are in Scotland as well, because of the makeup of our countries. And it was interesting, Vaughan Gething, the new First Minister, made his opening speech, his first speech to the Senedd this week, and he was basically just making the case for independence. That only by having a Labour government in Westminster has Wales got any chance. So basically admitting that Wales is reliant on the people of England not voting Conservative for Wales to have kind of opportunity. So it's genuinely depressing. What's interesting as well is that you've got Keir Starmer, likely to be coming in as next Prime Minister with the lowest ratings of any new Prime Minister since they've been recorded. It's not a case of Labour winning because of Keir Starmer. It's basically anyone but Conservatives, and Labour in a position to take advantage of that. So hopefully, it's all a big bluff, and when they get elected, they'll say, "Ha ha! We are going to spend all this, and we are going to borrow money, and we are going to invest in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland." But I'll hold my breath.
Okay, well, don't hold your breath. Maybe Linda, you probably won't be surprised to know that this youth mobility scheme suggested by the EU, it would have been reciprocal. So EU students, young people, would have been able to come and live and work and study in the UK. So I can maybe then understand why the Conservatives have got a problem with foreigners coming into UK in a post-Brexit UK. But why do you think Labour would have a problem with that?
Well, what I think covers a lot more than that subject as far as Labour's concerned. I think what you have there is a Labour Party that used to be part of a wonderful movement, that over many years has compromised here and there. And what you have now is a Labour Party at the top, which it's get elected at any cost. And the principles are just shrugged off because it's all about getting elected. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if, as Hugh was saying, and I hope he's not holding his breath, that if they get in, we'll suddenly realise that it was a ploy to get in and they still have these principles. I'm not at all convinced. They're pandering to what they believe are the rump who will get them elected. And they seem to think that that rump are those who are natural Conservative voters. They seem to think that even those who were Labour voters, that they turned away because of things like freedom of movement, etc. I would far rather Labour had made the case to say, look, you've got it wrong, rather than just say, right, okay, we'll just be Tories too, and we'll get power. And it's back to that thing I always say, it's the problem with UK politics and the way it's carried out is you basically have two sides who get a shot each. And you just wait for one lot's turn to be over and then the other side get a turn. So, and as that's been happening, they're getting closer and closer and closer. So the whole thing just, well, we know what it needs. What it needs is a huge shake-up and independence for England, let's face it.
Thank you, Linda. So the next item is the Scottish Government and its pledge to cut emissions by 75% by 2030. So for the First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, came under fire at FMQs this week over news that the Scottish Government is to ditch a key target on climate change, which was the pledge to cut emissions by 75% by 2030. The UK's climate watchdog has said that target's no longer credible and cannot be met. But the Scottish Government have said that there's a new package of climate actions measured up to be announced. They're going to step up action to tackle climate change with a suite of new policies on transport, including increasing the number of electric vehicle chargers and land use. There's going to be hopefully an integrated ticketing system which can be used across all public transport systems. Net Zero Secretary Mary McCallum confirmed that the Scottish Government has an unwavering commitment to reach net zero by 2045 and announced new legislation that's going to be brought in to do with carbon budgets, replacing annual targets. Let me try and get some more interesting cherries. There's going to be a challenge to the Scottish and UK governments to go further and faster to both of those governments. Methane suppression is going to be worked on to reduce emissions from livestock. They're going to encourage big large estates to restore peatlands. Tree planting and renewable energy is going to be increased. They're going to hope to be a reduced reliance on cars, all by 20% before 2030. And they said that Scotland has already met is already halfway towards net zero and has decarbonised faster than the UK. Linda, I think you were in Parliament at the time when a lot of the changes were being brought in about Scottish Government's targets. I didn't really summarise that very well there. Hopefully you can clarify it for us. What was it like at the time?
I remember, you've got to remember, it's 3 years since I retired, Brian. The memory is gone. But I do remember that discussion and when the legislation was put in place and legal targets. I also remember myself and some others having concerns about legal targets being put in place because it's a devolved administration and there are things out with the control of that government and indeed that Parliament. For example, we all know that energy is a reserved matter and it's a hugely important part of what we're talking about. That was an issue. Also at that time, we had a Conservative government which was determining to be green. That has changed over the last while. They have backtracked on that hugely. That's an issue that's in there. So that's concerns about putting things in as legal targets and making yourself on the wrong side of the law. I think it's a bit naive in terms of a devolved administration to do something, make something legal in stone if indeed some of the major elements of it you have no control over. Having said that, I don't think the SNP government is entirely blameless here. I think, you know, there was a time when there was a bit of bravado going on in terms of these issues, a bit of overconfidence and saying that these things could be done without always having a surety of delivery. And I think some of these things are coming home to roost. You know, events happen, things happen that change some of these plans. But the Scottish Parliament at the time was all for it. And if I remember rightly, it was the Tories particularly who were pushing to have this made legal and legal targets. They were all for it at the time. I've already said how they've backtracked. Labour as well were pushing to make it legal or it doesn't mean anything. And we all know that Labour have done a bit of a U-turn on their green pledges during this election campaign. So I think all players have questions to answer in this. Whether they will ever be made to is a whole different thing. So we now have this revised thing. And what I would say to you about that, Brian, is I read the stuff that came out from the Scottish Government. We're going to have integrated travel, this ticketing thing. We're going to have more charging points for electric vehicles. Then we've got the peatlands initiatives. I have to say, we've been talking about these things since the Scottish Parliament started. I remember when Labour and Lib Dems were in power, talking about integrated travel systems. I remember everybody talking about the electric cars, and having better charging points. There's an issue with the infrastructure for that. Nobody talks about the capacity of the grid. Again, we've got something there that is very much dependent on the UK government. So I think I'm disappointed about what's happened and a bit sceptical about the future. So I'll leave it there.
So some work to be done there.
Yeah.
Hugh, I'm never sure how much the news reaches, Scottish news reaches in Wales when it comes to things like this. I don't know if you're aware that it's not just the SNP part of the Scottish Government that's getting the flack over this. The SNP are in agreement with the Scottish Greens. It's not a full-blown coalition, but together they form a majority in the Scottish Parliament here in Holyrood. And the Scottish Greens have come under fire because of this change to the cut in emissions, as Linda's been outlining, is kind of their bread and butter. So their members are calling that perhaps they should put an end to the Butte House Agreement and break their agreement with the SNP. And if that happens, then the SNP will be in a minority government. Does that make the news in Wales? And if so, what's your thoughts on where the SNP would be?
Yeah, it did. As it bizarrely enough, if it comes across as being SNP bad, then we do hear about it south of the border. I actually commented on this on Twitter that it was the leading news item on the main sort of Radio 4 news about SNP ditching their pledges with regards to net zero, and then obviously the reporting then came, sort of the SNP have ditched this, Labour says this, Conservative says this, them being negative. And what I was angry about was the lack of context, because I show an interest in what goes on in Scotland through Broadcast Scotland, for example, is being aware of the context. And it wasn't a case of wanting to get rid of the targets. It was just a case of having to do it because of the situation as Linda said, about the levers that were required, that needed to be pulled from Westminster weren't being pulled. So there was a complete lack of context about this, because obviously the long-term target stays the same. And it was an ambitious target, and it's a shame that they've had to roll back on it. But it's the context that's been lacking, because again, what we get is a very superficial. The SNP have rolled back on this as if it was a decision they wanted to make. It wasn't. But it's interesting, with the Greens, because I think that they're meeting this weekend. I think, aren't they, to discuss, what they do with their cooperation agreement. So, similarly, in Wales, Labour have a sort of a minority government, but they've supported by Plaid Cymru in a cooperation agreement. And this week, because again, I don't know if you're aware, when Vaughan Gething was elected as leader, he accepted £200,000 as a donation for his campaign work, which is a ridiculous amount of money from a company whose directors have been convicted of environmental sort of matters in the past. Well, it's come to the light now that the company who donated the £200,000 owe money to a wholly owned subsidiary of a Welsh government bank. So there's pressure in Wales as well now on Plaid Cymru to pull out of their agreement as well. So it shows that the precarious nature of trying to run a government based on an agreement, because obviously the other party does have certain amount of power. I hope the Greens. I heard the leader of the Green Party in Scotland talking about it, and I think he was making a lot of sense, saying that it was because of the financial situation, and it wasn't a case of getting rid of that. The long-term plan was still the same, but they had to come up with a new route to get to it. So hopefully, the membership will see that.
Thank you, Hugh. Linda, I seem to remember that when Humza Yousaf first became First Minister, he was asked if he would keep the Butte House Agreement as the new First Minister, and he said he thought it was worth its weight in gold, I'm pretty sure was what he said. And today the Scottish Greens co-leader Patrick Harvie said that he honestly does not know the future of the Butte House Agreement, and that it is the most important decision his party will ever have to make as to whether they keep it or not. There's going to be a vote within the next 4 weeks of party members. By the way, Hugh, Kate Forbes has said that she thinks that she said, I'm quoting here, nearly all the issues that have lost us support in the last year are found in the Butte House Agreement and not in the SNP manifesto. So Linda, is Kate Forbes right? Are you a fan of the Butte House Agreement?
Yes, I am actually. But then I've always been a fan of governments that are not entirely of the one persuasion. When you look at, for example, some of the legislatures across mainland Europe, you will see that there's much more cooperation goes on. And it takes me away back to what my hopes were for the Scottish Parliament, which were that it would be about coalitions of ideas as opposed to coalitions of political parties. That was stymied right at the very start when we had Labour and Lib Dem coalitions. And I would probably think one of the best parliaments we had was the first one when the SNP came into power and we had a minority administration, because it meant that there had to be proper cooperation across the board. However, I think we have now got into a position of a real nastiness within our parliament that wasn't there before. A sort of copying of the Westminster model almost. That means that it would be very, very difficult for minority government in the current climate, the way politics are in the UK. I think it would be almost impossible for an SNP minority government, especially when we're now in the second half of a parliamentary term, running up to Scottish Parliament elections. So I do want the Butte House Agreement to sustain. I would say, probably as a as an SNP member, I would probably say that I think maybe for only having 2 ministers in that government and a small representation in Parliament, that they've maybe had a wee bit too much influence. But then again, you had an SNP government that was pushing the green agenda. So they can't be totally blamed for that. So I think it was the right thing to do. And I hope it sustains. I had a word with Patrick Harvey yesterday, actually, at the march, and as always, he was being the Democrat and saying, "Well, it's up to my party to decide." And I'm sure they'll have very, very heated discussions within the Green Party as to the way forward. So it'll be interesting to see.
Thank you, Linda. So moving on to you just mentioned it there, Linda, yesterday's independence rally in Glasgow. So yesterday, broadcast in Scotland, we were there in George Square to cover the first independence rally of the year. We streamed it live and it's available to watch on our YouTube channel. It was hosted by Eunice Allewmead and Iona Fife, and as well as the First Minister's speech, which was well received, we interviewed Pat Kane of Hue and Cry fame. He spoke about his 8 reasons for independence, Trident being the main one. He had some really interesting views on community action in an independent Scotland. We spoke to the filmmaker Jane McAllister, whose movie To See Ourselves, a 2014 documentary made of hope and fear, is being rolled out now. And we've got a chance to speak to James Robertson and to speak about his iconic The News Where You Are. He did a recital of, or a rendition of, and we got to speak to him about why he supports an independent Scotland. The First Minister's speech centred on diversity. He didn't shy away from recent news. He said the last 48 hours have been tough and they have been a shock for those of us in the independence movement and the SNP. He went on to say, when it comes to obstacles that come our way, just because obstacles are thrown in our way, are we going to pack up and go home? We are going to fight for what we believe in. In the last few days, they have said the independence movement is finished. You don't look finished to me, my friends. Linda, you just more or less implied that you were there. What was your impression of the event?
Well, I really enjoyed it. Not least because we had a dry day, sunshine, which was wonderful, first of the year, I think. So I really enjoyed it. There was a great feeling of unity, solidarity, generally. I think it was excellent that it was co-hosted by Believe in Scotland and Pensioners for Independence, of which I am now one, I have to say. And yeah, I thought it was generally a very, very good feeling. So the march was great. Got to George Square. I thought the rally was good as well. So yeah, one criticism I would have is, it's not even a criticism really, just it's about me. It's about, I found the standing about in George Square a bit difficult towards the end, and I think it took too long for us to get to the First Minister of Scotland. Although I enjoyed all the other speeches and things, I just felt it was a bit long. Highlights for me, James Robertson is always a highlight for me. And I thought Hamza Yousaf was excellent. Yeah, and I thought Ross Greer, interesting. You know, Ross Greer from the Green Party was very young when he was first elected to Holyrood, and has always been an excellent performer. But yesterday, I thought I thought that boy has fair come on, and I thought he was excellent. So yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Linda. And again, Hugh. By the way, Linda, thank you for mentioning that the organisers were Believe in Scotland and Pensioners for Independence. I should have said that right at the start. So thank you to them. Hugh, again, I wouldn't expect this would make the news in Wales, but what's your impression of what it was like yesterday? There was a lot of Palestinian flags in amongst the saltires, by the way.
It did make the news, and I think the main reason was because Martin Compston was there. So it shows how, sort of celebrity can raise the profile of events beyond their traditional spaces. So yeah, no, I think, just the fact that he was there was made it sort of mainstream news. And it's good to see, and it was nice to see that the weather was out. We've got our first Independence March coming up in June, I believe, in Caerfyrddin, Carmarthen, down west. So, hopefully there'll be a good turnout to there. We have had some issues in Wales with the sort of the indie movement itself, the organisational side of it. Yes, Cymru, the body that was sort of supporting independence, has gone through some tumultuous times. They got rid of their chief executive after he was only in post for a few months because it appears that they'd run out of money. But I think what yesterday showed as well in Scotland, that there's a need for more groups as well to be involved in the organisation. I'm very impressed with what Believe Scotland have been doing, and I'd like, it'd be great to see a Believe in Wales sort of starting up here as well. But the more groups that are involved, then it's reaching out to wider audiences.
Thank you, Hugh. And Linda, as you were there, I mean, we were we couldn't get out and about very much because we were in our outside broadcast van. But the day wasn't without its sticking points, was it? There was quite a big unionist counter demonstration. And one of the organisers did mention to me that Glasgow City Council was supposed to cordon them off, and the police were supposed to be there, perhaps in greater numbers than they ended up eventually. And then there was an incident with a rather alarming incident with a car where it looked like it tried to ram the rally. I don't know if you were. Did you witness any of those?
I was, yes. We were just a few rows behind where that happened, and when we didn't see it until we saw the police officer pushing the car back. So we actually thought it was somebody had forgot to put the handbrake on or something. It was only afterwards when we spoke to a couple of folk, Stuart MacDonald and Co-Cab Stuart, were right at that point. They were at the point where the car came forward. I mean, he didn't, I understand it was a young male driver. He didn't rev up and try to ram the crowd. It wasn't like that. It looked to me, as a layperson, of somebody who just was like an angry person. Why should I get held up because of these nut jobs? That kind of thing. I'm going to force my way through. And I think it was a female police officer. I think it was the lady who was walking beside us quite a lot, and she was lovely and she was great. I think it was her that stopped it, and then her colleagues went, and I understand he was arrested. So that wasn't very pleasant. Not necessarily a deliberate act to stop the march, although I don't know that, but that's not how it looked. As far as the flag waving unionist folk in George Square, there was certainly more than I've seen at previous things, but it wasn't a crowd. By the time I got there, I understand there'd been an incident and there were police around them, and they were sort of kettled, if you like to use the phrase. They just kept at it, blowing their whistles and everything else. There was a particularly nasty lady doing the rounds, waving her flag, who'd managed to get into the crowd and was blowing whistles in all her ears. To me, it looked like she was trying to incite trouble. She was wanting somebody to lose their temper with her so she could be a victim. But a police officer came and removed her and put her back to where she should have been. I'll tell you one thing that struck me about that was, in amongst the Union flags, there were a couple of English flags, St George's Cross, waving. And I thought, these people don't even know what they're about here. What they're doing flying the English flag, that's an insult to the English flag. And it is a mark of, there's so many of these folk don't seem to know the difference between Great Britain and England. And I find that quite sad, actually. So I was surprised to see that, a misuse of the St George's Cross.
Thank you, Linda. We're pretty much out of time, but I mean, I think if I can maybe say that, although I wasn't able to move around much, I don't think the unionist anti-demonstration or counter-demonstration was maybe as effective as they'd like to think, because I thought a lot of the whistling, where they were trying to drown out speakers and the like, it sounded like they were whistling for independence from where I was standing. and Hugh, I just want to say good luck with your march in Carnarvon. I'm sure it'll be a great success, and hope everybody thoroughly enjoys it. Yeah, maybe we'll head down and cover it if you'd be willing to have us. Maybe think about that. That would be great. Well, Linda, thank you again. Hugh,
Pleasure.
Dolch, as you say. Hopefully, I'm getting my pronunciation's getting a bit better there.
Getting there. You're getting there. Diolch.
Diolch. Oh, right, okay. So still some work to do. But thank you both again for your patience with me. I'll let you get back to your weekends and what's left of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, that's it for this week's Full Scottish. But before we go, let us just remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. You know our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, then please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular payment, we thank you very much. Our focus now moves to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. So I'm told that we're going to be starting a new crowdfunder again soon. But thank you again to our guests, to Linda and to Hugh. And thank you to all of you at home for watching. Goodbye.